so we'll have them a bit shorter, but you actually kind of have fresh memories of what every presenter presented. And I would, without further ado, I would like to invite Jae-hyun Kim from Korea to present the Korean case focusing on pre-feasibility study. So Korea, over to you. I'm muted.
Okay. Okay. Good morning. My name is Jae-hyun Kim, Deputy Director from the Korean Ministry of Economy and Finance. Today, I'll talk about pre-feasibility study in Korea. First, let me explain why and how we adopt pre-feasibility study, and after that, I'll talk about the latest improvement we made in the PFS for short in 2019. First of all, what is PFS? The Ministry of Economy and Finance evaluate feasibility of new large-scale project from an objective and unbiased perspective using PFS. We also established legal framework for PFS in the National Finance Act. If feasibility is confirmed, the project goes into the budget. Next, how was PFS introduced? Before PFS, line ministries carry out feasibility study in their own ways. This way of work resulted in project failure and wasteful spending. For example, line ministry read PFS concludes 33 projects except one has feasibility. Therefore, in 1999, the Ministry of Economy and Finance adopted pre-feasibility study. This is for the fiscal authority to analyze profitability of new large-scale projects with an objective approach. Since 1999 to date, 932 projects worth 427 trillion won were placed under analysis for feasibility. Among them, 340 projects worth 179 trillion, about 36.5% won failed to pass the test. PFS is definitely contributing to enhancing efficient fiscal spending. The National Finance Act identifies target project for PFS. New project of which total cost surpasses 50 billion won or fiscal input is above 30 billion won will be subject to PFS. Mostly are construction projects such as railroad, road, airport, and digitalization and R&D project. Projects other than construction, digitalization, and R&D also can be through PFS if their midterm business plan show that they were worth more than 50 billion won. This slide shows you how we proceed with PFS. The MOEP receives PFS requests from line ministries every quarter. The Budgetary Program Evaluation Committee confirmed the list of projects for feasibility test. Then the KDI, KIPF takes over to do BC analysis and subcommittee for Budgetary Program Evaluation kick into to conduct AHP. Project with AHP above 0.5 is translated as being feasible, and the Budgetary Program Evaluation Committee confirmed the result. Next, Line improvement we made in PFS celebrating the 20th anniversary of PFS in Korea. First, we apply different evaluation criteria to metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas. For metropolitan areas, economic feasibility factor has a higher weight at 60 to 70%, and balanced regional growth factor is not assessed. Meanwhile, as for non-metropolitan areas, balanced regional growth factor contribute 30 to 40% in multi-criteria analysis. By doing so, we gave greater consideration to balanced regional growth. Second, policy impact is analyzed by focusing creation of social value. With the new criteria, we are now able to see a project from various perspectives, such as job creation, life quality, environmental impact, and social safety. Third, we made change in the evaluation method of welfare programs. In the past, we applied the same methods to welfare programs as that of infrastructure project. Now, welfare programs are analyzed based on multi-criteria system. We focused on exploring various alternatives. Fourth, AHP governance is now in better shape. We installed a subcommittee to conduct AHP, and the budgetary program evaluation committee made a final decision on the result. Lastly, we invite a new partner, the KIPF, as a general budgetary program specialist. They will join KDI in the evaluation of SOC and construction project. This is all I prepared for you today. Thank you for listening.
Lexi, we are not able to hear you. Alexi, I think you're muted.
Yes. Apologies, I had some internet issues, which I think are now resolved. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. So thanks a lot, Mr. Kim, for excellent presentation. And we can actually open up for questions and answers session. So please feel free to raise your hands and ask a question. Or alternatively, you can also post your questions online through the chat. Are there any questions?
I'd like to ask a question, Mr. Fiscal.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I am a participant from Indonesia, and please excuse me if my English is not very good. I don't understand what I'm going to ask. I'd like to ask to the presenter. So from your presentation, I understand that what I get is the line ministry here in Indonesia, mostly the line ministry who has the large scale infrastructure project is from the public work ministry. Will have to submit their project proposal first to the Korean finance ministry, and then the committee will assess first. Is that correct? I want to make sure my understanding first from what you have just presented. And the committee consists of several bodies, including the KDI and the other one I forget. Is that correct? Maybe other can give explanation too. Yeah, what I want to ask is, usually Ministry of Line, in order to submit the the proposal to be able to be assessed by the committee, they have to prepare it quite before the time, or maybe a few years before, and it takes some kind of planning and preparation also, and in our country, the budget preparation is usually have a very limited span, and not to mention to spare or allocate more time to do the assessment like this, and how do you manage that in Korea? That is the my first question. And then my second question is, the final say of the committee, who has the authority, because it consists of several bodies, and how I mean, other party do not interfere to the result of the committee, the result of the assessment of the committee, because usually it will spill to the, I don't know, like politics or things like that, if it in regard to big project. Maybe that is my two question. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kim. Would you like to take this question, and then we can go to the next one?
As for the first question, if
I
line
don't
ministries want to
hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
When line ministries want to propose want to submit a proposal, they have to make the proposal 2 years before the actual planned implementation. So for 2 years, we can review the proposal to decide whether or not we will implement the project. Are you satisfied with the answer?
And the line ministry can can fulfill the requirement in 2 years. They have already prepared all the material needed to be assessed by the committee. Is that correct? So it's already well implemented, yeah, and well accepted by all the line ministry in Korea.
Mm,
Okay, I think I can accept your explanation. Maybe the next question is okay.
Thanks a lot. And we have another question to our Korean presenter. So from Delphine, the costing of the new projects can be a fairly difficult exercise for line ministries. So in case of Korea, did the Ministry of Finance experience this problem, and how was it addressed? Thank you.
line ministries refer to previous cases in case if they once built a road, they could refer to the previous projects to build a new road. So that is their reference. And line ministry themselves exercise pre-feasibility study themselves before they request for pre-feasibility study to the Ministry of Finance.
Thanks a lot. Delphine, do you have any follow-up questions, or you are satisfied with that?
That's clear. Yes, thank you. That's clear.
I think it's okay for the time being. Maybe later I'll ask again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So any other questions to our Korean Ministry of Finance colleagues? I don't really see any hands, and I think everyone is fairly quiet in chat. Well, so if we can move to the next part of the session one. Great. Well, thanks a lot again, Korea, for great presentation and for laying out the appraisal techniques and pre-feasibility studies that you have been using for the last, over 20 years already, fairly successfully. With that, I would like to introduce the next speaker, Tom Ferris, who is a senior expert in infrastructure financing, and he worked for quite a long time with Irish government, but also is an expert for multiple organizations such as World Bank, IMF, etc. So Tom, over to you, and I think you would be sharing the screen with your presentation, right?
Good morning, Alexei, and good morning, all the participants. Let me begin with two slides. The first a map, the second a table. The reason I'm putting up the map is to show where Ireland's location is on the west of Europe, but not only its location, but also the fact that it's trading in the world and a member of the European Union, which means that it has to abide by European Union rules, particularly in relation to fiscal rules. So that's my map. My table then is a table of the rules of the game called the Public Spending Code. And while it runs to nearly 500 pages, one can pick the particular chapter, one or more of the 12 chapters there, to approach the different types of analysis. And the second one on capital expenditure there, which was updated in December 2019, with more rigorous requirements for carrying out investment appraisal, is the most significant one from the perspective of this presentation. So having shown my map and my table, let me just refer to the fact that I also have submitted to the Secretariat a list of 15 web links, so you can follow up afterwards on the specific aspects of this presentation that interest you. And the presentation itself I'm building into fiscal constraints, domestic financing, EU financing, SOEs and PPPs, risks and value for money. So let me start with fiscal constraints. In the ideal world, governments would have sufficient resources to do all the things they would like to do by way of capital investment, but we don't live in an ideal world. And in particular, the world for Ireland has faced and is facing considerable fiscal constraints. First of all, operating as a small open economy, having to adhere to the fiscal rules of the European Union, having had to overcome a fiscal crisis, 2008, 2010, having to face and continuing to face the impact of Brexit, the departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union, and COVID-19. Just a few points on the fiscal crisis. The fiscal crisis necessitated the Troika coming to Ireland in 2010. That was made up of the IMF, European Central Bank, and the European Commission. And so the bailout started, but it was a two-sided project. On the one hand, the money was coming from the Troika, but on the other hand, Ireland had to endure painful adjustments to budgetary requirements. Now, all of the requirements set down by the Troika were met, and it heralded reforms which are ones I'd like to draw your attention to, particularly the last indent, because out of the fiscal crisis came an act of parliament which was setting down in legislation the requirements of national and EU fiscal rules, and also the establishment of the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council. In fact, I'll come back to this towards the end of my presentation in order to show the significance of this council. And so even if there hadn't been the crisis, Ireland has to abide by the EU rules, which resulted from the European Union deciding on a policy of Stability and Growth Pact in 1997 and other requirements. And these requirements mean that each member state has to submit quite detailed annual reports as to what its multi-term budgetary plans are. And then there are also corrective measures in this policy. And the corrective measures refer to the budget deficit having to be kept at 3% of gross output, and national debt having not to exceed 60% of gross domestic product. Now, of course, these rules have been put aside because of COVID-19 rules, but there are indications that they will be reintroduced in 2023, but that's ahead of us. My next slide, and of course, you're not going to be able to appreciate all the points. The big point I would make is within the cycle of any year, there are the requirements from the European Union, and there are the domestic requirements, and you'll also see the role which the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council plays. So this slide is to get across there are a lot of requirements that have to be met in terms of budget being rolled out. Moving on then to my second section, which is in terms of domestic financing. It is to get across the fact that public capital expenditure that means embracing investment projects, is part of the budgetary process. And they are rolling 5-year envelopes. They feed into a national plan, and the current plan is Project Ireland 2040. And again, that's one of the web links that I give here. It's a fairly sizable program of over 100 billion. Now, this program will be amended in the near future, and that is as a result of a new government came into power 1 year ago, and the composition of that government, it has different requirements. There won't be a fundamental change in the program, but there will be changes of some significance. And also, a signal has been given in a government statement as recently as July that the program envelope will actually be of a higher dimension. The other document I should refer to, it's important, it is called the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, is a plan which Ireland has to submit to the European Union in the same as other member states to avail of a large allocation of funding that is coming from the European Union following COVID-19, the pandemic. And of course, any submission in a program or plan such as the National Recovery and Resilience Plan is the case has to be made, the arguments put forward as to how projects will be rolled out and what the performance indicators are. That is just a shot of what the plan is for investment over the years to 2025. So one can see there it is stepping up in terms of scale. In the stepping up, one has to take account, and here I'm coming back again to the public spending code that sets the rules, the book of rules for planning and managing public expenditure. And this has benefited from the IMF's Public Investment Management Assessment that was carried out in 2017. Again, I give the web reference, but in the most recent documentation on investment policy in Ireland, it is clearly indicated that the recommendations that have been made in that IMF assessment have been taken into account. There are some other checks and balances which are important, such as a new initiative that any project over 100 million euro will have external assurance process put in place. There's also the role of the Project Ireland Delivery Board, which has an overarching role there, and then by way of capability within the Ministry of Public Expenditure and Reform. So the public spending code is being made more rigorous as we move on. Again, just to remind you, there are 12 sections to this, so one can pick what one needs if one is a public servant in doing one's project work. It is of help, I would submit, to refer to the role of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. In fact, just for a moment to go back, it is only 10 years since this department has been created and has been in operation. It is following a new government at that stage and the decision to divide the Ministry of Finance into normal Department of Finance functions and then separately the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. I describe it here as the ringmaster when it comes to the application of the code and the submission by line ministries of their projects. You'll notice in my second indent I put in bold print, but actual management and delivery of projects within capital expenditure allocations are the responsibility of each government department or state-owned enterprise or local government authority. I think it's important then, and it's one of the chapters in the public spending code, to refer to an annual process of quality assurance process, quite a comprehensive document that has to be produced by each department, showing what progress has been made, where there are delays, where there are increases in expenditure over planned expenditure. So there is this very good process in place. And that leads me to the EU. I'm not going to spend any additional time on this, just there are the normal EU fundings, but then there's this big program of expenditure which will be met from the EU following the COVID crisis. And the following table shows the sort of headings under which Ireland should get. You look at the bottom corner, you see the figure of 4.4 billion, which will come over the years up to 2025 under a number of programs, including the Brexit Adjustment Reserve and the Recovery and Resilience Facility that I mentioned already. So that's just giving an indication. A lot of funds flowing from the EU, but then there are conditions that have to be met. It isn't free money by any means. Moving on then to an area of SOEs and PPPs. SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and PPPs, public-private partnerships. State-sponsored bodies who are engaging in capital expenditure, it's under the umbrella of the Exchequer investment. Responsibility for the SOE's expenditure has to meet requirements of the ministries, and government agrees what amount will be provided for the SOEs. They have to apply the rules of the code. We've emphasized this point already. But in addition, it is worth drawing your attention to a separate government authority, New Era, New Economy and Recovery Authority, because that has been given responsibility to give commercial advice to ministries in relation to leading SOEs, including the way they develop their proposals for investment. So that's the normal route of investment in SOEs. If they are going the route of a PPP, obviously there are the PPP rules, and that is one of the chapters in the code. There had been this advice in 2006, but that has now been upgraded in December 2019. And it is given a separate section within the National Development Plan, Project Ireland 40, that I've already referred to. There had been a review of these PPPs, and I give a web reference on that. And what the review came by way of a conclusion to was that the PPPs were making a positive contribution, and they recommended a continuation into the future with amendments. Again, there is a separate government authority for the PPPs, the National Development Agency, Finance Agency. And that has direct responsibility to procure and deliver PPP projects as requested by local state authorities. In the case of transport, there's yet another separate authority. But just dealing with the National Development Finance Agency in this role, it is responsible for developing the procurement of projects referred to, and it hands over to the relevant SOE then for the construction to complete. So if you take time out to look at that particular chapter of the public spending code, we see it is very comprehensive. The rules are quite specific as what is required for a PPP. For those who want to read more, and I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but I found this a very useful article by 3 university lecturers in the University of Limerick on what their observations were of PPPs over the last 20 years. And it is saying they helped greatly but there are amendments that should be made in order to make them even better. But I will let you read that at your leisure, which leads me to talk about risks. Risks are covered quite specifically within the Chapter 2 on capital appraisal. And I've just pulled out a number of bullet points there showing about there needs to be clarity about the data and assumptions you're using. The risks need to be identified. There needs to be a debate about that. There are techniques out there, expected value and Monte Carlo analysis techniques, but it is imperative on projects that a risk management strategy is in fact incorporated in the process. And that risk management strategy needs to be communicated to the relevant stakeholders. There are two other references I bring in here on risk, and it is drawing attention to the fact that the central bank keeps an eye on the overall financial plans of government, which in turn leads to looking at what individual projects amount to. But this is a letter as recently as the 1st of September 2021, only a matter of days ago. And in it, the central bank governor warned the Minister for Finance that the economy is experiencing strong growth, but there's a risk that higher government spending, there are risks attached to it. And then he says it will be important to account for known structural risks to revenues and expenditures, as well as creating sufficient space for public investment. There hasn't been a response yet from the Minister of Finance. But if I move on to my other one, I did say I'd come back to the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council. The Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, it produced its view in May, submitted it to the Minister of Finance, and it is critical of the absence of a credible medium-term budget strategy. Given that it was May, we do have a response from the Minister for Finance, and he actually agrees that the supportive financing environment will not last indefinitely. And there's a signal there, reading between the lines, that we all know that in the world at present, the cost of financing is very low, but that can change with inflation. That can change. So the minister refers to the fact in the summer statement from government that they do look to slowing the rate of debt accumulation by reducing the size of the deficit as the first step of the process, and then saying as we move out of the acute phase of the pandemic, the government is committed to reducing public debt to a safer and more manageable level. Since I am mentioning the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, I thought you'd be interested to see, and you can do your own interrogation of this, that the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council has on its website a fiscal space calculator. So you can work out your own calculation. If you do X, what will the impact on the economy be? If you do Y, what will the impact be? So it gives not just people who work within the public sector, but interested people outside the facility to evaluate and interrogate fiscal space. Which leads me to value for money. And again, this is a chapter within the public spending code. It's an area of policy that I'm particularly familiar with, but you can become familiar as well, because if you open up the website and you go to this chapter of the code on value for money, it runs to just shy of 60 pages. It has a very good model of what the steps are in carrying out assessments. I just completed one of these evaluations, but before just referring to my experience, a key sentence from that 58-page document is They look at policy areas, they look at efficiency, effectiveness, they look at impact, and they look for recommendations to be made as to what changes should be made. So it's a very purposeful process. Those, well, I haven't included the web references. If one Googles some of the titles, one can find ones that I have over the last decade chaired, and the most recent one is just about to be submitted to government. It's on value for money in nursing home care costs. I'm on to my final slide. My thoughts, having prepared this presentation and having shared with you this experience, I would say we do live in a real and uncertain world. There are no such things as free investment projects. Not only are there monies that need to be invested in projects, but there are conditions that have to be met, training that has to be undertaken, planning that has to be undertaken, management that has to be undertaken. And in terms of looking into the future, we can't foresee the future, but one can certainly see the suggestion that constraints may become more difficult. One has to take into account climate change. There is the risk of higher inflation, and there is the prospect of higher debt payments as a result. In terms of any government doing its work, it has to face its critics. I put that in inverted commas, but it is the healthy debates that need to take place and continue to take place with Parliament, with fiscal councils, with central banks, and even the media. Now, there are good tools to help plan, evaluation, manage these projects. And you've heard me so many times saying the public spending code, so let me say it for the last time. But above all, it strikes me one needs a lot of common sense in going forward. Alexei, I've finished.
Thanks a lot, Tom, for excellent presentation and for giving us the case of Ireland. So let me open it up for questions. If there are any, please raise your hand or speak up, or just pose the question in the chat. Let me give it a go. Well, probably while people are thinking actually about some of the questions, let me ask you one as well. So the first one, right, and you have been referring that the Irish government is already using, but also plans to use even more state-owned enterprises and public-private partnerships to essentially to invest as part of the kind of overall 40/40 strategy. So for the PPPs, I mean, as you rightly said, they can certainly help achieve value for money, but they also carry with them fiscal risks that can derail the value. So how is the government, I guess, taking in terms of the Ministry of Finance, etc., taking on managing the fiscal risks and explicit and contingent liabilities that may come with PPPs? If you could just start with that, and hopefully we'll have more people coming in with questions.
Certainly there have been issues that have had to be faced, and some of these issues, for example, have arisen in the context of COVID-19. There would have been conditions under which certain transport projects would have been built on a PPP basis, that there would be continuing economic growth, and given the fact that transport is a derived demand linked to economic growth, that has been affected quite dramatically in terms of flows of traffic. So that to an extent, it wasn't of the making of the Irish government, but in terms of PPPs in the transport area not flowing revenues as they would have hoped from the projects, it has meant that there's been a transfer of some debt back to the exchequer. I probably would make a simple point that if PPPs had been much more significant in the overall context of public expenditure, there would be a much more serious problem than there is now. So to that extent, while there have been penalties, if I use that phrase, the government has had to bear, the penalties are not as significant as they might have been in an environment where PPPs were much more significant. Your next question, Alexei.
Great, thanks a lot. I think we have another question from Jim Brumby. So he asks you, what is the explanation from value for money point of view, in your opinion? So what is the explanation for the lack of ex post review from value for money point of view?
Well, the first point I would make is that, again, it's an example of COVID, because the last time that Jim and I worked together, I actually was in Seoul, rather than just being virtually coming over the wires. The value for money has come in for some criticism, the process and the chapter that I've drawn your attention to in the code. And part of the reason, although it hasn't been spelled out in any official document, but because I'm not a government employee, I can make the point, and having chaired 6 of these committees, there is a view that while very good analysis and recommendations have come from value for money studies, that they have taken too long. Now, I would, to an extent, would defend those value for money reviews in that they have the benefit of a wide spectrum of stakeholders on the review team, but it does take time to deliver. So what has happened, and again, it is in the code, the route that has now been put forward much more is focused policy assessments. And that is part of the chapter in the public spending code. So what's different? There are many value for money studies. They're carried out by a very useful innovation in the Irish public sector of the IGEES. I'll tell you what this initial stands for, the Irish Government Economic Evaluation Service. And it's a cadre of young economists who've come into the public sector. And they are publishing, having done much quicker, solo, virtually in some cases, assessments. And the old analysts would say that these young Turks, these young analysts may not have as much experience, but nevertheless that they produce reports, and these are published on the IG's. After this, I can send Alexei the reference to it. It's not one of my references, but it's a good website because it has not only the value for money reviews that I have been associated with, but also the spending reviews. Jim, you'll probably tell me I haven't answered your question.
Jim, do you feel Tom had answered the question?
Okay.
I see him.
Yeah. I'm here. Oh, and actually, I'm not on mute either. So no, I think it was fine. But I did think that in your presentation, you did say that part of the observation was that there had been a insufficient number, if you were, of ex post reviews of the value for money function. So, I mean, it's there is a question about how you create demand ex ante if you don't have the reviews ex post, right? That if you if you're not going to, in a sense, face the ultimate accountability of a subsequent report, then are you inclined to embark seriously on an ex ante value for money? So that was in part why I asked the question. A number of countries discussed this issue with in the past. It's come up. I think essentially, of course, people are much more interested in the future than the past, but putting that to one side. The other issue I think that came up a bit yesterday from Adrian Fossard, Tom, was, you know, the long-lived nature of many assets. The fact that prices can change, relative prices can change a lot over the life of an asset, and that, you know, with climate concerns also driving that, whether or not climate is very much front and center now on the way that value for money is being considered. So I guess that's the other rejoinder to it. If my typing had been faster, I would have got to.
Okay, can I add? Thank you, Jim. Can I add a little, because in fact, it does allow me to say a little bit more about Chapter 2, which is the capital appraisal. That, and I did use the word robust, but it might have got lost in translation. But that Chapter 2, which was updated in December 2019, has extended the number of steps in the evaluation process. And I know you can't see that, but it is, the number of stages have been extended, but there is that ex post evaluation stage, which has been given much more highlighting, because there is a whole section in that revised document that does require, and quite rightly so, a more comprehensive set of ex post evaluations. Because I'm picking up, and I agree with you on this point, that you can learn so much from the ex post evaluations of the, not just the things you've done right, but the things you've done wrong and the things that you should have been doing. The interesting thing as well, which wasn't there before, is that there should be publication of those. And in fact, the slide that I mentioned from my colleagues in the University of Limerick, one of the criticisms in the middle of that slide that I've given you, that I took out the quotes, it's almost as if Jim Grundy had been talking to my colleagues, because they say shortcomings, failure to conduct and publish post-project reviews, as well as the release of cost-benefit analysis reports and VFM assessments that underpin the decision to proceed with PPPs. So in other words, there is recognition. Now, Jim, you might well add the points there, but we need to see evidence of it. Yes, we need to see evidence, but the debate is open there, and certainly there is the recognition in the revised chapter on capital appraisal that this should be done, and also that there should be publication of these documents. One other point on climate change is that the debate has been taking place, and that it led to the final 2 chapters of the Public Spending Code reflect the need, and they have done it, revise parameters that need to be taken into account in capital appraisal, having regard to emissions, because some of our leading economists had criticized the earlier document that had been part of the code that didn't take sufficiently seriously what the impact of these emissions will be.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tom. And you actually have 2
Thanks.
questions coming from two different people from Indonesia. First one, let me read out both of them, and you can take them in any order. First one is the tariff imposed by the state-owned enterprise, private enterprise, to public in public-private partnership, regulated by the Irish government. And the second one, which I think is a very interesting one as well, as you mentioned, we live in a real and uncertain world. So would you please elaborate more on how to maintain resilience to future shocks, including toward disasters like pandemic? So back to you.
I'll take the second one first. There is, and it's happening, much more scenario planning, which is taking the most, what some might think are the outlandish likely or possible events. But there is no magic formula there. It really is my very last phrase, which I use, common sense. And the common sense is almost getting a team of people and putting them into a dark room in order to start thinking about the what if context. There is no book that can be opened on that one. It really is a standing back and recognizing that one has to think of, sketch out, even though one might not like any of the possibilities that are being looked at. I mean, one in particular, which is work is already going on in our local authorities in Ireland, is in terms of the rising tides, the impact on coastal areas, which are very real. It's not something we want to see, but we got a plan for. Now I'm going to have to. The other one you asked was, Alexi, come back to the first one. Remind me.
Sure. So the first one was for the is the tariff imposed by the SOE or private enterprise on public in public-private partnerships? So are those tariffs regulated by Irish government?
I can't hear your noun. Are they which tariffs? Did you say tariffs?
Yep. So in case of the public-private partnerships, SOE and or private enterprise can impose a tariff on public, on users of infrastructure that was created. So would those tariffs be usually regulated by Irish government?
Yes, is the answer on that one. Yes.
Great. And I think we have one more question, which from Jim actually as well. So you mentioned low interest rate, but should we also be thinking of super low discount rates, maybe even approaching zero?
Well, at least we're going in the right direction, Jim, on that one, because when the public spending code was updated in December 2019, there was a reduction in the test discount rate from 5% to 4%. And in fact, there's a caveat that that test discount rate should even go lower as the life of an asset is longer than 25 years. So, but to get it to the point of zero, I really would have to think about that as to what one can justify it in an economic context.
Great, thanks a lot. So let me again pause for a minute and ask if there are any other questions. Please feel free to just unmute and ask it directly or post on the website, on the chat. Okay, so no questions so far. So I'll actually have another one for you. And meanwhile, maybe someone else will ask the question as well. So you were mentioning that the state-owned enterprise is actually a large chunk of investment program that the government is considering and putting in place, etc. However, what we see in many countries as well, that these sometimes the kind of blurred commercial and public mandates of SOEs can essentially put a strain on their finances, and those really need to be treated carefully and clearly separated and properly funded. So I was just curious, what is the Irish approach to using commercial SOEs, as you mentioned, for the state-backed investments?
I come back to a generic point that I was making in my presentation about being a member of the European Union. Being a member of the European Union means that there are rules there in terms of what state-sponsored bodies owned by government can do, given that the market ethos of the European Union is to have a level playing pitch. So to the extent that you are giving non-state, putting non-state commercial companies at a disadvantage, that is there, and that is a requirement for ministries to bear in mind. Of course, there are issues that have arisen because of COVID-19. And of course, the European Union for the moment has put aside some of these requirements to ensure that there is this level playing pitch. But probably transport is the biggest area where the EU influence is there, that it's a separate state body that is regulating the transport market, and that it is that more and more body which is looking to transport companies to make their bid for contracts, and that is true in terms of the state bodies as well. So there are checks and balances that are there, not only from the Irish government's perspective, but also in terms of what the European Union has laid down by way of policy. And one last point I would make, and this would bring me right back to when I worked in the ministry, a paper that I helped draft in March 2000 called Governance and Accountability in the Regulatory Process. And that paper was very much picking up on this issue of that there were state-owned enterprises that really governments should set about moving out of, because there isn't a social dimension that needs to be catered for. And if there is, then you do it a separate way than getting an SOE, or as it's called in Ireland, a state-sponsored body to carry out that role.
Thanks a lot, Tom, for a very helpful response. So let me do the last call for questions, if there are any. And if there are not, actually, let me yield to Secretariat and ask them a question. I think we have saved roughly 20% of the planned time, since we are very efficient on time today. So would you prefer us to break, or can we directly go into the second session for today?
Should we take a short break right now? And then come back together in maybe how many? In 10 minutes?
That sounds good. So then we'll do just that. So we will see everyone in 10 minutes. And again, thanks a lot, Tom, for excellent presentation and great discussion.
But you don't need to see me again.
No, given that it's actually for you, it's not even late evening. It's pretty much middle of the night. I think we can certainly excuse you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, and have
Enjoy
a good
that. Bye, everybody.
Bye. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Iya kan udah.
Hello, everyone. It's 11:15, so I think it's time to begin again. And for session 2, we have Mr. Roflianti Kurniawan, our new BCOP Chair and Director of State Budget Preparation, Director General of Budget of the Ministry of Finance of Indonesia, who will be moderating session 2. Over to you, Pak Rofi.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Now we will continue the second session after short break. We will continue with the lesson from ASEAN countries regarding the climate taking. But first of all, before I start moderating the session, please let me use this opportunity to introduce myself as well as to express my gratitude to PEMNA for welcoming me to continue the role of Pak Kunta as BCOP Chair. It is a great pleasure and also an honor for me to be accepted as a part of the PEMNA team. Sincere gratitude from me, and I look forward to working together with PEMNA team. Thank you. Now, let me moderate this session. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, we would like to appreciate your time, taking of your busy time to join this BCOP Session 2 PEMNA Plenary Conference. Yesterday, in joint Session 2, we have discussed about the MOF role in strengthening the climate sustainability, and also we should strengthen capital expenditure for climate change through climate taking, and also how we should assess the climate risk and the need to adapt in large public investment projects. In this session, we will continue the discussion on that topic, but in more detail and also specific about the climate taking of public expenditure, opportunities and challenges. Now, from this session, we are delightful to have presentation from Philippines and also Indonesia. I hope this would enrich experience and knowledge for all participants. Before start, let me inform that the time for this session, the session will be about 70 minutes. The presentation time is maximum 20 minutes for each presenter. So maybe we could have Q&A, maybe could be after the first presentation or maybe after the two country presentation. We will have a Q&A session for about 30 minutes. Without further delay, I would like to invite Philippines. From Philippines, we have Ms. Mary Jo O. De Leon, the Supervising Budget and Management Specialist of the Economic Sector Division of the Fiscal Planning and Reform Bureau. So for Ms. De Leon, time is yours. You could start the presentation.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Mabuhay. I will be presenting about the Philippine experience in climate budgeting. So I will request my colleague to flash the presentation. Okay, thank you. Slideshow. Naka-slideshow ka na. Okay. I know it has been a difficult year for all of us, as we are all struggling in one way or another in fighting the invisible enemy, which is the COVID-19. As a response, we are ensuring that government interventions are directed towards more resilient and better prepared instrumentalities in times of crisis, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Likewise, the governments shall be ready to respond to natural calamities and strengthening risk resiliency in times of disasters. People have to face the reality of climate change. In many parts of the world, manifesting as increased volatility of extreme weather events. Based on the 2021 Global Climate Risk Index, more than 475,000 people died worldwide and losses of $2.56 trillion were incurred between the years 2000 and 2019 as a direct result of more than 11,000 extreme weather events. In the said report, the Philippines maintained its rank as the fourth most affected in the period between 2000 and 2019 in terms of long-term climate risk index, suffering an average annual losses of $3.18 billion or 0.54% of the GDP and a death toll of 859.35. The UNEP Adaptation Finance Gap Report 2020 reports that while there has been an increase in finance available for adaptation, the adaptation finance gap has not been closing, with annual adaptation cost in developing countries estimated at $70 billion, then reaching $140 to $300 billion in 2030, and $280 to $500 billion in 2050. This gives the indication that the gap between necessary financing to deal with climate-induced risks and impacts is even bigger than earlier projected. The development and implementation of a climate budgeting system is a strategic tool to support scaling and sustaining the implementation of the Philippines' transformative climate agenda. Climate budgeting is one area where we can make a lasting impact by ensuring that we invest in climate change adaptation and mitigation, and by ensuring that we build risk-resilient communities. Climate budgeting helps us assess the alignment and scale of the mobilization of public funds based on national climate policy priorities. Efforts on climate budgeting in the Philippines is legally anchored on Republic Act No. 10174, Series of 2012, or the Climate Change Act, which mandates the Department of Budget and Management to undertake the formulation of the annual national budget in a way that ensures the appropriate prioritization and allocation of funds to support climate change-related programs and projects in the annual program of the government. As a response, various enabling platforms have been enacted to provide a foundation for the country's climate change expenditure tagging exercise. This includes cooperating with the conduct of World Bank's Climate Public Expenditure and Institutional Review, and the issuance of policy instruments for the national and local levels. This slide describes the respective roles of selected agencies on climate budgeting. For our oversight agencies, we have the Department of Budget and Management as the lead in the integration of climate response in the prioritization, monitoring, and reporting of the budget. The Climate Change Commission to provide technical inputs on the integration of NCCAP priorities into each step of the budget process. Ensure quality and reliability of the climate budget data. CCC also reviews and monitors progress in the attainment of climate priorities, initiate climate policy dialogue, and lead capacity building on climate budgeting. The Department of the Interior and Local Government, as the national government agency with administrative oversight function to LGUs. The DILG provides capacity building program for LGUs to institutionalize and sustain CSET and monitor compliance by LGUs. Meanwhile, national and local governments incorporate climate budgeting into their planning as well as monitor and report their climate responses. The CSET has evolved over the years of its implementation from the issuance of its guiding policies in 2013 and 2014. Following the preliminary tagging results, the guiding policies were updated in 2015. Starting 2017, the tagging process was automated through the online submission of the budget proposal system of the DBM, and the results were reported in the budget of expenditures and sources of financing. In early 2020, convergence efforts with the Risk Resiliency Program was initiated. And when the COVID-19 pandemic forced the world to lock down and the bureaucracies shifted to work from home arrangements and new normal setups, we immediately implemented virtual orientations and deep dive sessions to ensure the compliance of the implementing agencies and maintain the integrity of the climate budget. In 2021, we have continued to adopt virtual orientations and have started to target capacity buildings for state universities and colleges and government-owned and controlled corporations. The institutionalization of the climate tagging process may be attributed to the following points. Government leadership. Leadership at the highest levels of government, along with a vision to act, was the primary factor in catalyzing systematic effort and sustaining the leadership at the oversight level to strengthen the public sector climate response. Design flexibility. A flexible design based on real-time application and the incorporation of feedback loops was the cornerstone for rapid progress in establishing a climate budgeting system. Capacity building and training. Building the capacity of NGAs, LGUs, and oversight agencies was a critical step in ensuring that all stakeholders remain engaged in the development and implementation of the climate budgeting system. Engagement. Engaging all stakeholders throughout the implementation was a key factor in sustaining the momentum. And lastly, technical assistance and targeted advisory. The World Bank technical assistance was critical in defining the overall scope and the evolution of the incremental task under a flexible design. The effectiveness of the climate response requires integration of climate change issues across the planning and budgeting cycles for developing policies, to identifying, designing programs, funding and implementing the programs, and monitoring and reporting progress. In the institutionalization of climate budgeting, several policy instruments were put in place. A CCC-certified Quality Assurance and Review Form, or the QAR form, must be attached as an annex to an agency's climate budget proposal submission to the DBM before it is considered complete and be subjected to budget review and evaluation. This policy is clearly stated in the annual national budget call, a document guiding all agencies on the preparation of their respective agency budgets. The submission of a certified QAR form is crucial in ensuring quality climate budget submissions, their alignment with national climate goals, and providing information for the improvement of climate budgeting. In the review of budget proposals, Climate projects that are responsive to the national government priorities and show evidence of proper planning are given higher priority for funding under the fiscal space, as stated in the annual budget priorities framework. Sections 27 and 28 of the general provisions of the FY 2021 General Appropriations Act ensures that government facilities and critical infrastructures are planned and budgeted with the resiliency to climate and disaster risks as major consideration. In addition, the GAA also mandates that all agencies should consider disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation, and where feasible, climate change mitigation measures in their planning process and regular operations. Another instrument is the convergence budgeting approach of the Risk Resiliency Program, or the RRP. RRP is the framework program for strengthening the resilience of natural ecosystems and the adaptive capacity of vulnerable communities to short and long-term risks in key Philippine landscapes. The RRP is the implementing program of the Cabinet Cluster on Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction, or the CCAM-DRR Roadmap 2018 to 2022. The CCAM-DRR Cabinet Cluster Roadmap has the overall goal of building climate and disaster resilient communities, supporting equitable and sustainable development through the achievement of 4 outcomes as follows. 1. Increased adaptive capacities of vulnerable communities. 2. Ensured adequate supply of clean air, water, and other natural resources. 3. Increased resilience of critical infrastructure. And 4. Enhanced knowledge, access to information, and institutional capacities. The roadmap also identified priority geographical targets of 17 vulnerable provinces and 4 major urban centers throughout the country. Translating the roadmap into programs and project investments, the RRP investments focus on the following areas: Community Livelihood and Enterprise Continuity Program, Integrated Water Resources Management Program, Enhancing Coastal Protection Program, Climate and Disaster Information Services Program, and Seismic Resiliency Program. Even though not all programs, projects, and activities under the RRP are captured by the CSET, the tagging process can identify the climate tag PAPs under the RRP that are already being implemented in its target areas, which will give a snapshot of the project's progress and influence the next steps needed. As shown on the screen, CC expenditures steadily increased from 2015 to 2018. It declined in 2019 after the shift to cash-based budgeting, and in 2020 due to reprioritization of the budget to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it rose to 282.4 billion this year and will inch up to 284.5 billion pesos next year. The Philippine government is committed to mobilizing resources that enhance resilience and promote a low-carbon development. Hence, the budget for climate change has progressively increased in the recent years. It grew by an average of 15.27% from 2015 to 2022, which is much faster than the average annual growth rate of the total national government budget of 11.26%. Through the national budget process, climate change budget is tracked and reported by identifying, classifying, and tagging climate change expenditures using a common policy-based typology. The CSET enables policymakers to better understand the scope and distribution of climate action and provides them with the much needed evidence on the institutional readiness for scaling up climate finance in the Philippines. It has also increased the awareness of government agencies and local government units to craft climate and disaster responsive budgets. Recognizing the vulnerability of the country to the impacts of climate change, the government prioritizes adaptation, making it the anchor strategy espoused by the National Framework Strategy on Climate Change and subsequently elaborated in its National Climate Change Action Plan. The basic foundation for prioritizing adaptation measures is to ensure that losses and damages from climate change and extreme weather events are minimized in a sustainable manner to ensure achievement of national development targets through capacity building and enhancing resilience. Acknowledging the need to shift to a more flexible power supply mix, the Department of Energy, as part of the climate change mitigation efforts, announced the moratorium on the department's endorsements for greenfield coal-fired power plants in October 2020. Consequently, this recent policy shift will focus on the use of renewable energy for a more sustainable power system and clean energy transition. The results of the CSET show that the highest priority of CC expenditures is given to water sufficiency projects, which receives an average of 140.62 billion pesos for the last 3 years. Meanwhile, a substantial increase in funding for sustainable energy, such as promotion of expansion of energy efficiency and conservation, development of sustainable and renewable energy, and transport, was also recorded, rising from 7.12 billion pesos in 2021 to 59.96 billion pesos in 2022. Recognizing that some of the outlined reforms can only be accomplished over the medium to longer term, DBM and CCC focus on generating concrete products quickly and to simultaneously engage across the steps of the budget and planning cycles in real time, building upon ongoing existing reform efforts across government. Shown on the screen are the online portals of both the CCC and the DBM, where all stakeholders can easily access relevant information and references on CSET. The CCC Sneak This contains the relevant resources on figures on national and local climate tag PAPs in the budget, CSET toolkits, manuals, and QAR forms, as well as the relevant local, national, and multilateral policies and commitments of the government. Meanwhile, the DBM's BESF, which is submitted to the Philippine Congress together with the President's proposed budget, contains the reports on the results of the CSET by implementing agency and by NCCAP strategic priorities. This also contains the report on program convergence budgets, which include the risk resiliency program. In the implementation of climate budgeting in the Philippines, we encountered 3 major challenges. First is capacity building. So as a result, continuous training must be conducted to ensure the proper onboarding of new personnel, as well as knowledge updating for current staff. Increasing tagging compliance and accuracy. Plans and activities are currently being developed to increase tag projects among government-owned and controlled corporations and state universities and colleges. Synchronizing national and local climate budgeting. The climate budgeting process for both the national and local levels will be harmonized in both timeline and project planning to ensure complementary support between the two units of the government. Moving forward, the DBM and CCC, along with other concerned agencies and development partners, have been coordinating to further the synergy between the local government units and the state universities and colleges, to improve monitoring and evaluation, to link climate budgeting and gender mainstreaming, as well as looking into ways to utilize the CSET results in decision making. Before I end my presentation, I would like to share some learnings from the Philippines' implementation of climate budgeting for almost 8 years. Climate budgeting is an important additional foundation of the climate change response of the Philippines. Its continued implementation is recognized in the Philippines' intended NDC as a means of implementation for the country to enhance climate resilience and promote mitigation efforts. It puts the Philippines in a strong position to leverage financing for its CC response, improve investment programming, and overall incentive frameworks. Enhancing convergence across sectors and between the national and local government levels of financing is a top priority. There is recognition that a shift is needed to go beyond sector-based mainstreaming as the primary entry point for action. While strengthening the Philippines' disaster response remains a key need, investing through the budget at scale and more effectively in climate resilience and adaptation measures is a critical priority, which provides a cost-effective approach towards alleviating the impacts of climate hazards on people, assets, livelihoods, and the national economy. Doing so will not only require the continued strengthening of the climate budgeting framework, but also enhance planning, implementation, and operational frameworks to ensure that the appropriate technical and investment options are being delivered on the ground in the most cost-effective manner. When fully implemented, the climate budgeting system will enable a continuous feedback and learning process whereby gaps can be identified and budget allocation readjusted to effectively respond to climate challenges. The implementation of the Philippines climate budgeting over the years has enhanced the government's capacity to implement the system. This process has begun to transform climate policy and programming decisions at the national government agencies, interagency, local government units, and national oversight agencies. Thank you and mabuhay.
Okay, thank you, Ms. De Leon, from really clear and comprehensive presentation. We realize that budget for climate change is very important. However, we have to realize that since the beginning of 2020 or maybe the first quarter of 2020, we have to more focus on the budget to respond to the pandemic. So basically, in Philippines, climate budgeting system is a very crucial tool to control and also monitor the implementation of budget to support the climate change. And also in the Philippines, regarding the organization, the DBM, Department of Budget and Management, shall allocate the amount, the budget substantial or appropriately to support the climate change. Now we are entering the Q&A session. Do we have the question from the floor? Any question? So basically, the Ms. Delian presentation focus on the organization and also regulation, to support this climate change, in which the government leadership is very important. Also to invite the participation of the private sector, and also there is a CCC that will selection and also choose the priority for the action, and also to improve the procedure and the process to support the climate change program. So do we have the questions? You can ask the question now, or maybe you could ask the question later, after the presentation from the Indonesia. Okay, please, Ms. Moretti, please raise your question.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. Thank you for the excellent and really inspiring presentation from the Philippines, which proves that there are a lot of best practices that started in the region, and a lot of things to learn from the rest of the world, from Southeast Asia. I think there were two really important, many important messages in the presentation, but I picked at the end of the presentation two things that you said, which I think are very much aligned with the recent recommendations and publications by the IMF. The first one is the importance of investing in adaptation of the infrastructure. And you said it is cost effective. I think this is a crucial message. I think what's important is that very often what's classified as maintenance is not perceived as a similar effort as what is classified as capital expenditure and new projects. But through tagging, by identifying in recurrent expenditure the maintenance spending that is supporting the adaptation to the climate change challenges, I think you can really highlight and value the effort that is done by your country. And this is when tagging of recurrent expenditure is particularly useful in my view. The second thing that you said is that all levels of government, trying to expand the effort to all levels of government is going to be crucial for scaling up the efforts that have been done in the past. Fully agree with that too, which is a key message also of the recent paper of the IMF on green PFM. My question is, do you already have a roadmap on how to do this scaling up to all levels of government, and an idea of how you will go about it?
Thank you, Delphine, for that question. Actually, as earlier presented, with the convergence of the climate change expenditure tagging efforts and the risk resiliency program, I think it's slide number 14, if I'm right. I can share? Yeah, Jeffro will share the slide. So the risk resiliency program, there are already this is the roadmap being implemented from 2018 to 2022. So in fact, this is the first roadmap submitted by a cabinet cluster, which is implementation ready. So with the CCAM-DRR cabinet cluster roadmap, the investments are more targeted, and this ensures that the investment efforts are focused on the most vulnerable areas of the Philippines.
Two follow-up questions actually. Sorry, the first one is on this roadmap. Do you plan to extend to SOEs also, GOCCs actually in the Philippines? Is it something that you're considering? Because a lot of public spending is going through the GOCCs.
for the GOCCs, we just capture the expenditures of the GOCCs that are being provided by subsidies from the national government. So we have actually having preliminary discussions on how to capture the climate change expenditures of the GOCCs under their corporate account. So, but it's very preliminary at this time, but we're thinking of ways of it as one of our ways forward. So we just...
Congratulations.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's very. My last question, very quick one. It's very impressive how quickly you've achieved results. Again, congratulations for this. Do you think this might be due to the experience you already have with gender budgeting, which has somehow laid the ground for line ministries to understand the concept of impact analysis and tagging, or do you think this is completely separate?
Actually, linking climate budgeting and gender mainstreaming is also in the initial phase of discussion. But we have a basic law for gender, and I think we're just thinking of ways to link the budgeting approach of gender budgeting and climate budgeting at this time.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Moretti, for the question, and to Ms. De Leon for the explanation. Now we will move to the next question, from Ms. Dwi Rini from Indonesia. So the first question is, does Philippine government budget, the budget, it is more on the preventive program or mostly on the disaster countermeasure regarding the climate change impact, So regarding the countermeasure, for example, since the pollution in the city increase very high, so that means the government need to reduce the operation of coal power plant, something like that. So that the first question. And then the second question from Ms. Dwirini is, does Philippine government subsidize high octane fuel, or do the Philippines still consume low octane fuel widely? So this is related to the Philippine policy regarding fuel subsidy. However, how the implementation of fuel subsidy in the Philippines. So we will clarify first these two questions, and then later we will go to the Vietnam question. Please, Mr. Leon.
Okay. Thank you for those questions. For the first question, to respond to the first question, shown on the screen is the climate change expenditures in terms of response. So as you will see, we are more on investing to adaptation measures because we chose to be proactive rather than reactive. So the basic foundation for this is to ensure that losses and damages from climate change and extreme weather events are minimized in a sustainable manner to ensure achievement of national development targets through capacity building and enhancing resilience. As we all know, geographically, the Philippines is on the way of strong typhoons and tropical cyclones. So we really invest heavily on adaptation measures in order to minimize the losses of lives, properties, and assets. For the second question regarding the government subsidizing high octane fuel, to my knowledge, I don't think we're doing we're giving subsidy on that. However, we can just get back to you for the full information. We will submit a written response on this. Thank you.
Thank you. So basically, it is an interesting policy from the Philippines. It is strong policy. Basically, the budget will focus more on the adaptation, huge budget for the adaptation compared to the mitigation budget. Now we go to the Vietnam. Could you please raise your comment from the Vietnam?
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, the representative from Mary Joy from the Philippines experiences. From the Vietnam's perspective, Vietnam is also prone to climate change. In the regions, I think maybe the Philippines is the most vulnerable country, and Vietnam stays the second or the third. So we need to have a very comprehensive countermeasures, both proactive in increasing the awareness of the local people on addressing consequences of climate change. And we would like to share with you also some experiences of Vietnam. My comment is from Vietnam. We have a separate dedicated program which was established very soon in 2005, 2006. And in that comprehensive program, we had also different solutions for socio-economic development and enhancing income sources and livelihood for the citizens in order to foster their resilience facing extreme events caused by climate change. We also develop a large-scale public investment programs to fight against different extreme events, and also floods and storm prevention, as well as the seawater rise level. And we also dedicated our personnel, also universalization of health and education services, and using different types of low carbon and renewable energy programs and projects. So what I mean here is how to develop a climate budgeting in the most efficient and effective way. I learned from the experiences of the Philippines that you are very much focused on a very comprehensive national, so-called national targeted program. In Vietnam, we had a similar national target program, but what I mean here is that we should not have only one specific program like that. It should be very frequent and regular via different activities of related agencies and bodies. So I think if we have only one program from the government, it is not enough. We should be also implementing different types of the activities of the spending units. So my first question is how to specify our overall goal of climate change adaptation and mitigation into and incorporate them into the specific programs, plans, and activities of all the spending units or central governments, local governments. And my second question is about the resources for climate budget are from multiple sources, and the majority should be from the state budget, right? But there would be other sources of financing, for example, from non-public sources, from contributions of the citizens themselves, from the corporate sector, or even from international organizations. So we have multiple sources of funding for climate budget. So how to be better mobilizing the other non-state sources and how to use them effectively? These are my two questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. If I may repeat for your query for clarification, your first question is on how to how to set up priorities um, and subsequently these priorities be translated into climate change tag expenditures. And for the second, is all about mobilizing private funding as one of the critical sources of financing. Can you please confirm if I got it right? Sorry. Okay.
Yes, I would like to clarify on the first question. My first question is not limited to the overall program or the national target program on climate change adaptation and mitigation. We need to specify such overall goals into the specific plans and activities of different spending units at the national level and the local level. This is my question, how to do it. Because normally the national target program or your program on climate change is very overall, but there should be implemented in everyday life of the organizations from the local level to the higher level. This is my first question. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, as I've said earlier, these climate expenditures are connected to the National Climate Change Action Plan priorities. So I would like to flash a slide on that, wherein the Philippine government has identified 7 priorities of investment. So these NCCAP priorities serve as the guide of the national and local governments in identifying and tagging their budget climate change budget expenditures. And second, next slide. The Climate Change Commission as the oversight policy on climate change tagging has devised a CSET decision tree. So on how to tag or how to identify whether a specific program or project is a climate can be identified as a climate change expenditure. So flash on the screen is the CSET decision tree. This is our our guide on how to identify or on that climate-related expenditures at the national and local levels. So currently, we are limited to the national government budget, and for the local government budgets, that is not under the supervision of the Department of Budget and Management, because as our law states that the local government units are autonomous from the national government. So they have their own setup, but the DILG, or the Department of the Interior and Local Government, is the national government agency with oversight function to the local government units. So they guide the local government units together with the CCC on how to tag the local government budgets. So for the second question, I think I also covered your query on the sources of financing, because as of now we have our limitations, and as I've
Sorry, can I have the follow-up question for that?
Sure.
Vâng, anh nói đi ạ. So in the case of the Philippines, I would like to talk about the role of the CCC.
Okay.
Is it limited to the guidance or also expanded to the penalty or sanction if there are any units that do not follow and comply with the national plan? And in your budget arrangement, in case the LGU does not have any kind of priority for climate budgeting, will the central level or CCC or BG, the ministry has any kind of stopping their budget expenditure activities and having no kind of prioritization like this?
So as of now, we don't have sanctions, but sorry. As of now, we don't have sanctions. CCC's mandate is limited to the coordination and monitoring of government climate change policy and response. In addition, CCC is the technical arm of the government, which reviews which reviews and ensures the integrity and accuracy of climate budget. So, for the DBM, I think I've shown a slide on prioritization. So we don't have sanctions, but we by prioritizing expenditures that are implementation ready and connected or related to climate response, I think and with the implementation of cash-based budget, we somehow ensure that all the programs, projects, and activities that are being proposed for funding are ready to be implemented. So if the financial performance is low, we don't usually recommend additional funding. We just, if it's an ongoing project, we just provide for the cost of the ongoing requirements or ongoing components. So if they ask for additional funding, we don't prioritize the programs and projects with low performance utilization.
Is that more question from Vietnam? Or to clarify the explanation? Okay, thank you for the Vietnam regarding sharing.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay,
I just want to say why I pay attention to the penalty or the sanction. In Vietnam, there are two sides. Some provinces, some local governments, they are making full use of the priorities in climate in order to propose projects and programs. And after getting approval, then they will reallocate those funding into other projects not related to the climate. And the second aspect is that some other provinces, they do not have any proposal for climate budgeting. So we think that there should be some kind of penalty or sanction or kind of compulsory requirements for the local levels to follow. And thank you for your answering. Thank you so much, Chair. So if we have time, I think maybe the representative from the Philippines can answer our second question. But if not, then we can move on. Thank you.
Okay, please, from the Philippines, if you want to answer or maybe clarify the question.
Yeah, I think I already, okay, I will just reiterate my answer for the second question regarding the sources of financing. So, as of the moment, our tagging process, is limited to capturing the national government expenditures and local government expenditures. So, as I've answered, I think, to Delphine's question earlier, we are looking at capturing the corporate funds of the government-owned and controlled corporations, but it's a very preliminary discussion at this time. And we are also looking at capturing green budgeting practices of relevant private stakeholders, but those are also at the very preliminary stage. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the Vietnam and also for Ms. De Leon. I think we should go to the next presentation. But after the second presentation, I think you still could ask a question, yeah, to the Ms. De Leon, or maybe to clarify again, yeah, that's something that you not yet found, yeah. But now we will go to the second presentation. The presentation will be conducted by Mr. Irnaldi, yeah. Mr. Inari Prayuda is a policy analyst from Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance Indonesia. Ms. Inaldi will sharing experience regarding Indonesia action to taking the climate change. So to Ms. Inaldi, please you could start the presentation.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Rofi, mohon izin. Good morning everyone. Can my voice be heard? Hello?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
hear your voice, yeah.
Okay, Pak, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very happy to be a part of this prestigious event on the second day of the Public Expenditure Management Network in Asia, PEMNA to 2021. Today specifically, we are discussing the topic of climate tagging of public expenditures. To start, maybe I can introducing myself first. My name is Rinaldi Prayuda. I'm a policy analyst at the Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. Daily routine, I'm a part of a group of policy analysts who formulate policy recommendations related to fiscal policy on climate change. One of the several policy recommendations for climate change implemented by the Indonesian government is the climate budget tagging, which has been implemented in last few years. Today I will say some things, hopefully can be useful for us. This is overview of my presentations that I will present today. The first is one overview of climate change in Indonesia, how Indonesia's condition related to climate change, plans for dealing with climate change, funding needs and funding strategies, including through climate budget hedging policies. The second is the climate budget tagging mechanism carried out in Indonesia. How the implementation of climate budget tagging is implemented in Indonesia, how the process and what important things might need attention. The third one is the result of the analysis of the climate budget tagging that has been carried out. Various points of view will be presented on the result of the analysis carried out from the climate budget tagging that has been conducted. And the fourth one is related to the Green Circle instrument. Green Circle is an innovative financing from the result of tagging we've done so far, and is used as a fund that intended for development that supports effort to deal with the impacts of climate change. And the last one is opportunity and challenges from the implementation of the climate budget tagging so far. Next slide, please. Okay. I will start with the impact of climate change to Indonesia. Indonesia is an archipelagic country with more than 70,000 islands and is very vulnerable to the negative impacts of the climate change, such as rising sea levels that counts in small island. As stated by the Ministry of National Development Planning of Indonesia, experience a sea level rise of 0.8 to 1.2 centimeter per year, and around 65% of the population lives in coastal areas. This is certainly a serious threat to the people of Indonesia, especially those who live and work in coastal areas. From data released by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry of Indonesia in 2020, from 2010 to 2018, national GHG emission experienced an increasing trend of around 4.3% per year. The warming of the Earth's temperature from the increase in global greenhouse gas is real and is reinforced by the statement that from 1981 to 2018, Indonesia experienced a temperature increase trend of around 0.03 degrees Celsius per year. In the figure on the left, based on the S&P report, Indonesia is classified as a country that is very vulnerable to the impact of climate change. This means that Indonesia must be more active and play a role in effort to deal with climate change problems. We cannot just sit back and wait because the bad effects of climate change will come sooner or later. There are several risks can occur if climate change is not handled properly, including the threat of water scarcity, threat of food scarcity, health threats, and damage to ecosystems on land, sea, and of course coast, as we know that Indonesia has a very long coastal area. Next slide, please. Yeah, Indonesia has a strong commitment to tackling climate change and support global efforts to keep the increase in the Earth's temperature below 2 degrees Celsius and strive to see the target of net zero emission by 2050 or 2060 or sooner. The government is also committed to increasing resilience and adapting to the impact of climate change. And in addition, it also seeks to align the financial sector to achieve the target of the Paris Agreement. Indonesia has ratified the Paris Agreement through Law Number 6, year 2016, as a form of commitment to support effort to reduce global temperature. The government has also confirmed this commitment through the NDC, which is targeting reducing emission by 29% with self-effort by 2030 and 41% with international support. The 5 main sectors are targeted consists of forestry, energy and transportation, waste, agriculture, and IPPU. While forestry sector and energy and transportation sectors are the 2 largest sectors that targeted to emission reduction. The figure on the right bottom, that's the projected need for funds to achieve emission reduction by 2030. It's around 3,014 trillion rupiah based on the second biennial update report that's submitted by the government in 2018, and it increased to around 3,700 trillion rupiah that state in the NDC mitigation roadmap. Next, okay. This is a commitment to the addressing climate change signed in a Ferris policy taken by the government, including by the ratifying international agreements on climate change, start with the UNFCCC, Protocol Kyoto, and lastly, it's Paris Agreement, as I mentioned before, and put them all in a national development policy. Tackling climate change issue is a national priority number 6 in our National Midterm Development Plan 2020 to 2024. Several policy has been conducted by the government to respond to climate change, specifically by the Ministry of Finance through the fiscal instruments, starting with study on the mitigation fiscal framework. There are tax incentives for renewable energy, revocation of fossil fuel subsidy, and so on. And among those policies, the implementation of climate budget tagging, see the amount of the expenditure that is by the government is one of the policy to handling climate change. There are several future steps of climate-related fiscal policy that the government has prepared to cover climate change funding needs. For example, we are preparing carbon pricing policy through carbon tax and carbon trading. It's still under discussion, and updating mitigation fiscal framework. The next one is integrating planning and MRV systems, and last one is preparing the other such financing, such as SDGs bonds. One, please. In order to achieve the low carbon development goals and to achieve emission reduction target, as well as achieving the net zero emission targets, is believed requiring a small amount of money. Various efforts to mobilize funding sources continue to be carried out by the government, but through domestic and international funding resources, we can see that the domestic consists of state budget and non-state budgets. We can see that the government has spending on it using a fiscal transfer mechanism, carbon tax, and green finance, such as or SDGs. In the non-state budget, government also mobilizing other such funding from like regional budget, where local government manage the budget, carbon trade, which is still under discussions, SDG 1 that managed by the special vehicle mission by the government. Also, government established the Indonesia Environment Fund to manage fund for the environmental issues, including the climate change. One thing that might be concerned of this target must consider just an affordable transition. This means that selected efforts need to take into account the economic and social condition of the country, economic growth, and environmental conservation effort must run in balance. We know that this is not easy things to do. Some of the challenges faced include limited fiscal capacity, optimizing non-state budget, ensuring economic recovery conditions, especially in this difficult time. Also have through a pandemic situation, strengthening green private financing and strengthening the greening of the financial sector that support the sustainable development agenda. Next one. Okay, this is the climate budget tagging mechanism. Okay. As I mentioned before, government is aligning global agenda of climate change to the domestic policy in NDC document and the national medium-term development. Climate change is a part of our national priorities number 6, which is targeting improving the quality of the environment, improving disaster resilience and climate change, and targeting low carbon development. It is then translated into a government work plan and budget allocations are made according to the needs. Budget tagging is a tool for the government to track the output and budget for climate change mitigation and adaptation. In central government, the Ministry of Finance has prepared a climate budget tagging book or manual as a guidance for ministry or agency to tagging the budget allocations. Next one, please. this is where the initiative has been thought. Climate budgeting is a mechanism for marking in planning and budgeting documents to track and identify Ferris outputs and budget size for climate change in mitigation and adaptation activities. The implementations of CBT, climate budget tagging, is conducted by the Ministry of Finance along with the Ministry of National Development Planning and the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and also involving a number of related ministries or agencies through the plan and budget systems, the system called Krishna system. Since 2012, the Ministry of Finance has been actively conducting several policy studies in support of climate change financing, and has been used as the basis for developing climate budget tagging initiative. The mechanism is sought to increase the transparency of public funding for climate change control in Indonesia. And in 2016, the Ministry of Finance began implementing climate budget tagging mechanism in the state budget. The implementation of tagging was conducted in 2016, still on that slide, previous slide, with 6 pilot ministries and agency, and only for the mitigation budget. Tagging on adaptation budget then was conducted in 2018 after done some improvement, capacity building, and mainstreaming the climate change issue in the planning and budgeting process. On the right side is the timeline how we start the initiative climate budget tagging until the data from the tagging was used as underlying programs to issuance green sukuk as a source of financing to tackling climate change. Next slide. Yeah, the climate budget tagging based on the government regulation number 17 of 2017, put as the legal basis. The planning and budgeting cycle is carried out in one platform called Krishna system. Krishna provides a tagging feature to be carried out by ministry or agencies on their work plan and budget documents. There are several thematic tagging that can be chosen by the ministries or agencies. As we can see, the issue of climate change is in cadre number 004 for climate change mitigation and 007 for climate change adaptation. This climate budget tagging cycle, as we see in the figure on the right, that's a cycle where the tagging is conducted. Start with number 1, where related ministries and agencies tagging the climate budgets on the Krishna system. And second one, the CBT result, the climate budget tagging result on Krishna are synchronized with the smart system managed by DG Budget, Ministry of Finance, to see the realization of the marked tag budget. The result, sorry. The result of synchronizing budget data are submitted to the MRP system. There are 2 systems on the Apsara that are managed by the Ministry of National Development Plan, and the SRN or National Registry System that managed by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. The result of synchronizing budget data and emission reduction produce 2 outputs. First one is used as an underlying program for impact report on innovative financing, and second one used as a national report for the the emission reduction achievement. This process is done annually, where the cycle shows how the government set the development plans in where red part of the top, still on the previous slide. Start with the red part on the top, and then followed by the preparation of work plans of ministry or agency in the blue, then translated into work plan funding needs and the dark blue. Next one is implemented in the program and then reported in the government performance report at the end of fiscal years at the orange part, and then start again with the red part. Next slide. The following are the parts of monitoring and evaluation of tagging that have been carried by ministry and agency. Starting with reviewing data in January to April, including to see output data that might not have been taken, then proceed with the data reconciliation in May to July to confirm the target data and discuss output data that might not be taken. And then this fast, May to July, is crucial to finalizing the value of the climate change mitigation and adaptation budget in the current year, because the final budget value will be used in the preparation of national and international reports, as well as reference for the issuance green sukuk. In this process, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of National Development Planning, and Ministry or agencies, related agency, coordinated to improve the accuracy of climate change budget tagging. Next, from August to October, data analysis is carried out to see trends in the climate change budget and estimate the capacity of government funding needs to finance climate change. And finally, in November to December, the climate budgeting result report is expected to publish. Next one, this is the result analysis from the budget tagging that has been conducted. The data we use here is from 2018 to 2020, where tagging has been covered mitigation and adaptation budget. I mentioned before that before in the 2016 to 2017, we're still tagging on the mitigation, only on mitigation budget. From the result of the tagging analysis that has been conducted, some information is obtained, including that the average climate budget allocation in 2018 to 2020 state budget is about 100 trillion rupiah per year, and the average mitigation and co-benefit budget reached 62 trillion per year Indonesian rupiah, and the average adaptation budget reached 40 trillion per year. Around 88% is used to finance green infrastructure, and approximately 12% is used to finance supporting activities such as regulation policy, research and development, capacity building, and community empowerment. The share of the current budget in the state budget has a downward trend. It is necessary to strengthen climate change commitment and the work plan of the ministry and agencies in the future. The blue block on the graphic at the top right represent the mitigation budget allocation, while the yellow block represent the adaptation budget allocation. As we've seen that the mitigation budget dominates budget allocation for climate change, while the red line shows the amount of climate change budget allocation in the total of state budgets for each year. The average budget availability for climate change is approximately 4 to 5% per year, and the pie chart below shows the composition of the budget usage. The pie chart on the left shows the most of the budget is allocated to the energy and transportation sectors, while the pie chart on the right shows that the budget allocation is used for infrastructure development. Next one, please. These slides try to describe the budget allocation for its targeted sector and ministries and agencies involved in the climate budget taking in the mitigation actions. From the results of budget taking on climate change mitigation actions, it can be seen that the largest average budgets in the energy and transportation sector, and while the smallest is in the IPPU sector. And in its implementation, taking is carried on the 7 ministry consists of Ministry of Environment to Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries. This slide tries to describe the budget allocation in the adaptation budget. As we can see that the largest average budget is in water resilience, while the smallest is in the energy. And in its implementation, tagging is carried on 14 ministries and agencies. Next one, please. Yeah, this is the green sukuk, which from the results of climate budget tagging, the data issued by the government to issuing green sukuk. Green sukuk is an Islamic green bond combination of investment instruments that prioritize green-based projects and Sharia or Islamic-based sukuk. From the green framework compiled, green sukuk can be used to finance several eligible sectors, including renewable energy, sustainable transports, waste management, sustainable agriculture, and so on. In the process, Indonesia's green bond or sukuks are reviewed by CICERO, taking into account 4 main pillars. First pillar is about use of proceeds. Pillar 2 about project evaluation and selection. Pillar 3 about management of proceeds, and Pillar 4 is about reporting. And preparing the impact report, the result of the report has been audited by several credible institutions such as KPMG, PwC, and EY. Next slide, please. In developing the green bond framework, Indonesia is supported by the UNDP through the Innovative Financing Program. Since 2018, Indonesia has issued 4 times global green sukuk and 2 times green sukuk retail, with the largest amount is 1.25 million US dollar in 2018. So far, green sukuk have financed 5 eligible sectors: renewable energy, energy efficiency, waste, disaster issues, and sustainable transport. Green sukuk also contribute to 6 goals of the SDGs, namely goal number 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 13.
Mohon maaf Pak Iladi, bisa agak dipercepat presentasinya ya.
Ya, baik Pak. This is the result of allocation impact report. As we can see that green sukuk also project contribute to emission reduction. 2018, 19, and 20, green sukuk also contribute to development in Indonesia, such providing railways, managing waste, providing energy resource, and providing clean water resources. Projected environment and social impact from the issue of green sukuk, we can see that the green sukuk contribution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1.4 million tons in 2020. Okay, this is opportunity. There are several opportunities from the implementation of climate budget tagging. There are at least 3 that can be presented here. Also, I believe there are other opportunities that can be explored from the implementation of climate budget tagging. The first one is development of the CCFF initiative for climate change fiscal framework to take a deeper look at the availability of budgets for climate change support from public and private sources. Second one is a replication of climate budget tagging implementation to the subnational level. tagging mechanism is developed on the local government budgets at the provincial or district and city level to see the amount of the climate budget allocated at the regional level. And the third one is the implementation of tagging on other thematic. For example, currently the budget tagging process for gender responsive climate change being carried out. This activity try to analyzing the amount of the climate change budget allocated to the central in the central government and how the budget is related to the gender mainstreaming. Next slide. It's a brief overview of the CCF that was initiated. Briefly, an analysis is carried out to see deeper the need of financing climate change and how big the gap in the funding is to achieve the emission reduction target in 2030. The funding is from public and private funding. In the process, we are assisted by some developed partners such as UNDP, GI, GIZ, and TPI. Next slide saw some piloting areas of the implementation of climate budgeting in the regions and the provincial level and district level. We call it regional climate budgeting or RCBT. There are 11 regions in 2020 with a blue writing and 6 pilot regions in 2021 with a green writing. We also compile a CBT book or manual in the region for regional budget taking as a guide for the local government to take their budgets on climate issues. Next one. This slide is trying to explain the gender response climate change budget taking activity. In brief, gender response climate change budget is a mechanism to identify gender mainstreaming and the program related to climate change mitigation and adaptation. The gender budget taking mechanism use GAP and GBS method. Taking has been carried out by the relevant ministry or agency so far, coordinated by the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection. We at the Ministry of Finance are trying to further analyze the link between the gender and climate change. There are very several policy regulation initially related to the gender mainstreaming, such as Presidential Instruction number 9, year 2000, Ministry Home Affairs Regulation number 67 of 2011, and the National Midterm Development Plan 2020 to 2024 has also included gender mainstreaming as a strategy that is encouraged in the system. Tagging for gender is available by adding code number 003 for program or activities related to the gender responsive budgets. Next one. I believe this is my last slide. Some of challenges faced so far in the implementation of climate budgeting. At least there are 3 main challenges I can share. The first one is the tagging commitment carried by ministry agency. I think it's necessary to strengthen the commitment of the ministry or agency to do the tagging from from the analysis result. The downward trend in the budget also caused by non-optimal tagging by the operator at the ministry or agencies. The second is to increase the capacity building. It is necessary to increase the capacity of personnel in tagging process and climate change issues. And also employee rotation also become an obstacle in the tagging process. New person needs new knowledge. Increased understanding through the implementation of in-house training also as conducted is considered still insufficient. The third is system integration from the planning process to the reporting process. Synchronizing the integration of existing information system is required, starting from planning, budget allocation, realization, until report on the achievement of emission reduction are expected to be linked. There are many systems from various institutions that need to be integrated so that the tagging process can be fluid and systematic, hopefully. As I mentioned before, at least there are 4 systems in the whole process. Krishna and Akshara system managed by the Ministry of National Development, Smart system managed by the Ministry of Finance, and the SRN system managed by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. We are now trying to encourage these 3 things to be improved so that the implementation of tagging is maximized and the result obtained reflect accurate and data information. I think that's all for me. Thank you for your attention. Back to you, Pak Rafi. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Irnadi, for the comprehensive presentation. Now, I think we still have 6 minutes for Q&A. Is there any question?
Excuse me,
Okay,
my name is Marwan.
please.
Can I
Uh,
ask some question?
Okay, please. So I think we have 2, yeah. Maybe first from the Miss Marwan and then from Miss Moretti. First, we will take the question and then Mr. Irnadi will answer the question. Please be short and.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rofianto. My name is Marwan. I am from Ministry of Finance, Director General of State Asset Management. I would like to ask for both of the speaker, Mr. Irnaldi and Miss Mary Jo de Leon, especially about the climate budgeting on both of their country, Indonesia and Philippines. I would like to ask about the involvement from the SOEs. Do you think that the climate budget tagging also reach the activity which already done by the SOEs? Because we already understand that SOE is also fiscal tools that we need to map their activity so that we could understand they also have same commitment to our government to support the climate change problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then the second question for Ms. Moretti, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is that you've highlighted some downward trends in spending directed at climate change response, but you think it might be due to challenges with the marking. I was wondering, however, whether you were considering developing other tools as part of your green budgeting effort that would enhance the volume of spending directed at climate change mitigation and adaptation.
Okay, thank you. Please, Mr. Irnadi, to respond to the question.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Rafi. For the first question from Pak Marwan, is it CBT with the SOE's budget from now? The climate budget tagging is conducted still conducted in the central government, hasn't reached the SOEs. As I mentioned before, we are trying to explore more how the fiscal transfer can see as a whole with climate change fiscal framework studies that we are still in progress. I believe that the SOE spending will be state in that studies. And the second question from Ms. Moretti is that downward trend, as we can, as I mentioned before, that there are caused by the lack of tagging by the ministry or agencies operator. Right now, we're not thinking of add some new tools on the tagging. We are right now, as I mentioned before on the slide of the timeline and monitoring and evaluations of climate change, we are discuss more with the Minister of Planning and the line ministry and agency to make sure that the data from the tagging is cover all the mitigation and adaptation. So there are mechanisms that we try to look deeper on the activities of program that might not be tagged by the Ministry of Agencies in the process. Thank you. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Pak Irnaldi. So we already at 10:50 Jakarta time. I will ask to the Secretariat whether we still have time. For example, for Mr. Leon, if you want to add something or for the Vietnam question, I will ask Secretariat. Or we
Please
have
go ahead. We still have a few more minutes.
Okay. So first, Mr. Leon, if you want to add something.
Okay, thank you. In case of the Philippines, for the state-owned enterprise, or what we locally call as the government-owned or controlled corporation, as I've presented earlier, the national government budget tagging is limited to the subsidies or the GOCCs receiving subsidies from the national government. However, we are in constant dialogue with the with these SOEs, and they are able to capture their climate expenditures sourced from their own corporate budgets. However, CCC and DBM are still looking or exploring ways on how to capture these expenditures with the current setup, because we are as of now, we are using the online submission of the budget proposal systems of the DBM as the platform in capturing the climate change expenditures. So we are positive that eventually we can capture these expenditures. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leon. To the Secretariat, still we have time for Vietnam question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, please, Vietnam, raise your question.
Thank you. I would like to have a short question about the green sukuk. In Indonesia, in order to incentivize and encourage the investors to the green sukuk, are there any incentives and encouragement mechanism and policies from the government?
Yeah, about the incentive, I think there are no incentive from the government, but the Green Sukuk initiative try to combine the green investor and the Islamic investor to mix this instrument, so they can learn to each other. And it's quite interesting that the green investor love to learn the Islamic bond, and the Islamic investor interested to learn more about the green bonds. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, Pak Irnaldi. I think we have to end this session. Thank you for the presentation, and also thank you for the question. I think we have very interesting discussion, yeah, since both Philippines and Indonesia are very vulnerable to the climate change. Both countries are archipelago country. Indonesia with more than 17,000 islands. We have risk, since already been mentioned before, that the sea level rise around 0.8 to 1.2 centimeter each year. So this pose a danger to our island. So we have a very good discussion, fruitful discussion, but we have to end the session. Thank you. I think I have to return the floor to the Secretariat.
Brophy, so the teacup is still in their session, and we have a few more minutes. In case anyone at the BCOP have more questions, we can spend more
Okay.
time. Or wait till they teacup join us for the wrap-up session. The joint wrap-up session will be held here in the at the BCOP meeting room.
Okay, while waiting from the TCOP, if there is still any question to the Philippines and also to the Indonesia, yeah. Actually, I still have question, yeah, to the Philippines. As in Indonesia case, yeah, since in 2020 and 2021, we have to split our priority. We have to split between budget to respond to COVID and also budget to economic recovery. But I think we still also need to allocate budget for the climate change. As we can see in the Indonesian case, I think we have experience problem, yeah, regarding taking the climate change problem. But in the case of the Philippines, I can see that from the 2020 to 2021 and the 2022, I think the budget for climate change budget taking increased very significantly. So actually, I would like to see the figure actually how the condition before the COVID, for example, in 2018, 2019, and then to 2020 when the COVID pandemic, is there any impact for the budget taking effort to the Philippines? To Ms. De Leon, maybe you could elaborate more. Yeah, we already seen regarding the budget in 2020, 2021.
Hi, Rofi.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jethro from the Philippines.
Yeah, okay, please.
Yeah. Can you just reserve your question for later? Miss De Leon just stepped out of a room. So maybe we can proceed to the next question, and after that, you can ask Miss De Leon the question again.
Okay. So, please, any question? Okay, please, Ms. Moretti.
Yes, maybe a follow-up on my previous question on the other tools. You answered that you had already presented what you were planning to do on marking during your presentation, but actually my question was on whether you were thinking of something else than marking that you could use and that could improve further the analysis and allocation of resources to climate sensitive policies. In particular, I was wondering whether you were planning to strengthen your tools as part of the budget formulation process at the moment when the new policies are considered. So could you explain if there is anything that is planned or anything that is done for strengthening the analysis and selection of new policies that are climate change sensitive when the budget is formulated?
Okay,
yeah. If I may answer that, if I'm not mistaken, taking your question correctly, if there are any other tool or analyzing more outside the climate budget tagging that we can improve. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, outside the climate budget tagging initiative, or maybe I forget to mention that the climate budget tagging is only for central government expenditure that which in the state budget there are other sorts. I mean there are another instrument in the expenditure outside the central government expenditure. For example, that Mr. Marwan already said that government also transfers the budget to the SOEs as investment, and also state budget also transferred to the local government to the transfer fiscal and so on. What I like to tell you that outside the TBT that we've done on the central government expenditure, we also analyzing that the transfer fiscal to the local government and the SOEs. But as I mentioned before, that this actually has not done the tagging to those two instruments. So we are trying to capture this in the SOEs and local government expenditure to the other initiative. For example, the local government, we're doing the regional climate budget tagging, and the SOEs we are trying to capture it through the CCFF initiative or climate change fiscal framework. So I hope we can see more this expenditure or spending on the SOEs or the local government to or related what the spending on the climate change related. Thank you. Hope that answer your question.
So, Ms. Delian, you want to add something?
Yes, I'm sorry, I had to step out of the room for a while. But may I request for the question for the Philippines to be repeated? Thank you.
Basically, it is a more general question, yeah. So maybe from the floor, we still have question, and we already have announcement from the secretariat that the TCOP will join around 11:10, yeah, Jakarta time. So we still have time. Do we still have questions? Maybe we could stop and wait the TCOP to join this room.
The TCOP is here. Hello.
Okay. So
try to be on time, but we're very interested in your discussion.
So we could stop the discussion for the PCOP, and I will return the floor to the secretariat.
Welcome everyone. So welcome to the joint wrap-up session. I'd like to introduce you the head of the PEMNA Secretariat, Dr. Kyung-San Ha. She'll be doing a quick wrap-up and then make a quick announcement.
Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all here at the joint wrap-up session. Jay, would you please show the presentation for the announcement? PEMNA Secretariat has some announcement for the next steps after the plenary meeting. Okay, it's coming. Yes, we have two announcements. The first one is about the next COP meeting. Next COP webinar will be early or mid-November, and it will be 2 to 3 hours long for each webinar. To prepare for the COP webinar, COP LT meeting will be held on early October. For webinar topic selection, we will provide a list of potential topics and do a survey that will ask for each country to select 1 to 2 preferred topics. And second announcement is about the opening for the proposal. Now we are having 2 openings for proposals. One is for second PEMNA Advisory Services Program, and the other is for online study visits. The submission deadline for this proposal is September 22nd. If you have any question regarding this proposal, please contact PEMNA Secretariat. That is all for the announcement today, and now I'm going to move on to the recap of the plenary meeting. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on 2 fruitful days of learning and sharing. It's the second PEMNA online plenary conference, and about 160 participants from PEMNA member countries, international organizations, and observers registered for this meeting. Overall theme of plenary meeting is sustainable and resilient capital expenditures for post-COVID recovery. Capital expenditure is a very important issue at this time related to the pandemic. Due to the COVID-19, government budget and resources for capital expenditure has decreased, but the demand for capital expenditure are rather increasing in order to boost national economy. During the plenary meeting, we have 2 main themes. One is sustainable capital expenditures, and the other theme is climate sustainability, focusing on climate budget taking. As new activities of PEMNA 2, we had 2 overview sessions for each theme. Mr. Jim Brumby for Public Investment Management and Mr. Adrian Bozard for Climate Taking and Capital Expenditure for Climate Change. Mr. Jim Brumby gave us excellent presentations about making the most of public investment management, and in his presentation, virtuous cycle of public investment and the challenges of efficient mobilization in public investment management were explained in detail. This overview session provided nice framework understanding sustainable and resilient public investment management. IMF and Indonesia presented the importance of medium-term expenditure framework in order to enhance sustainable and predictable capital expenditure. Leveraging different financing sources from government, SOEs, and private sector, including PPPs, are illustrated from the presentations of Indonesia, Korea, and Vietnam. Government review and appraisal from Vietnam and value for money test from Korea and pre-feasibility study from Korea are explained in their presentation as the way of ensuring fiscally sustainable capital budget. Mr. Adrian Bozard explained in detail regarding climate budget taking and public investment management in climate changing. These overview sessions also provided a lot of information and insights regarding the current practices of climate budget taking worldwide. He also elaborated what should be considered in public investment management in terms of climate change. Presentations from Philippines and Indonesia today elaborated how climate budget taking have been implemented in their context and what the benefits and opportunities and challenges are for these countries. Many countries are preparing to implement climate budget taking as one of the MOF's climate change strategies, and the experiences of these countries will be very helpful for those countries. I hope this exchange of wealth information insights on sustainable and resilient capital expenditures enriches your practices and responses toward COVID-19 and climate change. Thanks to all your help and support, we were able to complete the journey successfully. As we wrap up our discussions, I would like to express my gratitude to those who made these meetings possible. First, I would like to extend my appreciation to our PEMNA Steering Committee co-chairs, Ms. Al-Makhanani and Mr. Jichel for their excellent leadership. Without your support, this meeting would not have been possible. Also, I would like to thank Mr. Daniel Hachette, Minister Counselor of EU, for your support to PEMNA meeting and activities. I would also like to thank Mr. Rofianto Kunyawan, BCOP Chair, for the leadership and support for this event. I'm also grateful to Mr. Alexei Olebushko and Mr. Fabian Sidera, on our BCOP and TICA facilitator, for facilitating this meeting together. During this two-day meeting, we had an opportunity to hear from several international experts. My special thanks goes to Mr. Jim Brumby, Mr. Adrian Fujard from World Bank for fantastic presentations which made the overview sessions very helpful and successful. And I would like to thank Ms. Delphine Morelli, Ms. Suaz Josh from IMF, Ms. Tom Ferris, Mr. Mike Williams, Mr. For bringing their professional expertise to the table. I really appreciate the presenters from Cambodia, Indonesia, Korea, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam for sharing your experiences and knowledges here in PEMNA. I would also like to thank the delegates from the PEMNA member countries for engaging in such fruitful and constructive exchange through the 2 days of the plenary meeting. Let me conclude by thanking all of you once again for your time and valuable insight. And I look forward to welcoming you again at the next PEMNA meeting. Thank you very much. And I think our facilitator, Alexei and Fabian, might have a few words for closing. So over to you, Alexei.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to be part of this plenary conference. And that's actually my first time being kind of formally part of PEMNA program on the bank side. And also it was real pleasure to actually moderate both plenary and the BCOP session today. I think we had very interesting exchanges, very useful on multiple topics related to how to ensure sustainability of capital spend in both environmental, climate, and fiscal. And I really hope this conference helped you to better understand what other countries are doing in the region and outside. And the exchanges really, to me, doesn't stop here. And I would encourage all of you to stay in touch with each other and continue learning from each other, either through Secretariat or directly. And with that, look forward to seeing you quite soon in other PEMNA events. So over to Fabian.
Thank you, Alexei, and thank you, Dr. Ho. I understand that you wanted a quick wrap-up of the TCOP, which was parallel. So let me just give that very quickly, and also really emphasizing the wealth of exchanges and discussions. And really happy that we have been breaking new grounds. It's the first time, I understand it, that in this network we touched upon climate, the climate risks, its impact on public finances. And that's great, and hopefully to be continued because the crisis is not going away. So building on yesterday's very good presentation, discussions on the way to improve efficiency and value for money of capital spending. and a way to assess also the exposure and impact on climate change. In the TCOP, we dove a bit deeper on what it actually means for treasuries, what they can do to adapt and respond to this increasing shocks and uncertainty, which is bound to increase. And I would like to thank really the colleagues from Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Korea, Philippines, and Vietnam, as well as the two experts, Mike and Suhas, whom you mentioned, for the excellent contribution, and the TCOP members for all the questions and discussions. So it was a very rich session with many country examples and international examples. In the first session, we had a very rich discussion with 6 speakers on the 2 core functions of treasuries, cash management and commitment controls. What came out of that is how important the cooperation, very close cooperation is with the budget department and with big spending agencies. I think that's really the benefit of these plenaries where we have the 2 COPs joining in together. We discussed notably how to forecast and manage cash under uncertainties, how to increase flexibilities in revenues with taking a more public sector perspective, leveraging also treasuries of SOEs and other treasury funds, financing, the size of cash buffers, how constrained they are by fiscal rules, how to prioritize expenditures. Cambodia and Malaysia share their experiences and lessons learned, which hopefully will also be useful for the next crisis. We then discussed the fundamentals of commitment controls, which is really a prerequisite for good cash management, and particularly capital commitments, which are significant but also the hardest to forecast. There we learned from Indonesia how it intends to recover from this crisis through a very ambitious $91 billion investment program, and how it strengthened its investment governance to do so and leveraging its SOE. Korea shared its solid experience in budgeting, stringent vetting of capital investments, and total project cost management practices, which were very useful. In the second session on climate, we discussed the significant climate risks, cost and financing of climate disasters, with 2 great presentations from the Philippines and Vietnam, 2 of the most vulnerable countries in Southeast Asia. And the early lessons learned in terms of how to mitigate these risks, how to move away from a reactive approach where the budget covers the cost of disasters, to a more proactive approach, to risk-sharing mechanism using different insurance instruments, and also the difficulties that come with it, because to do proper insurance, you need to know your assets, you need to value your assets, and know the risk exposure of your assets. So we had a lot of discussion on how to improve asset management, asset valuation, and I think that's really a new generation of reforms on which we need more time to discuss. So let me close there in thanking the TCOP members for their very rich presentation and discussions, and the Secretariat for this excellent organization and partners. Thank you very much, and talk to you later.
Mr. Rofianto, would you like a few words for closing?
Very interesting discussion today. We learn many things, from other country experience and also from different country. I think this will enrich our knowledge. I think it will improve our policy in the near term. We hope that we could continue this plenary to again increasing our knowledge and to build connection between countries. So I think that from my thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rofianto Kurniawan. And I think we are done for the plenary meeting. So as I explained earlier, we have LT meeting for next COP meeting in this coming October. And we have openings for advisory services program and online study videos. So please give your comments and feedback for this plenary after this meeting. The Secretariat will be distribute the evaluation survey. So that's it. Thank you very much, and I hope you see you all very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you very much.
To all of
Thank
you.
you,
See you
everyone.
soon.
Bye.
Thank you.